Welcome to the Navik Gaming Podcast, where it is our mission to explore the business and future of video games. We bring together the industry's brightest builders, investors, and thinkers to keep a pulse on current events, dissect emerging trends in games, share lessons learned, and have a great time. This podcast is also part of Navik's growing ecosystem, which ranges from free and premium research to consulting and advisory services. For more information, visit www.navik.co. This episode is brought to you by Lakestar, one of the leading European venture capital firms. Lakestar's mission is to find, fund, and grow disruptive businesses that are enabled by technology and founded by exceptional entrepreneurs in Europe and beyond. Founded by Klaus Ammels, the team's early investments include Skype, Spotify, Facebook, and Airbnb, and since raising its first fund in 2012, Lakestar now manages an aggregated volume of over 2.8 billion euros across their early and growth stage funds. The team actively advises and supports portfolio companies in marketing, recruitment, technology, product development, and regulatory insight, accompanying founders from seed to early stage, growth stage, or exit. Lakestar's games and media team has made 18 investments, including 1047 Games, Zebedee, Modulate, and Trace. If you're interested in learning more or getting in contact with the Lakestar team, simply go to lakestar.com or check out the details in the show notes. And with that, let's jump into the episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Navik Roundtable. I'm your host, Devin Becker. With me, two wonderful guests, the ever lively Aaron Bush and Mario Stefanidis. It's too many vowels and too many letters for me. If you want to correct me, feel free to. Good, awesome. How you guys doing today?
Awesome. Excited to be here.
Yeah,
Cool.
doing great.
Awesome. Well, we got a lot of news to cover, but hopefully fairly briefly, a lot of updates, including everyone's favorite topic. Hopefully, this is the season finale of the Unity saga. We'll see, I guess, whether it continues from here, but we've got an update on that with some compromises potentially. Jim Ryan with a retirement, unfortunately, from Sony. Capcom with some interesting comments coming out of the president. Phil Spencer also with some unearthed comments from the gift that keeps on giving, the trial that likes to leak things. And then Epic, unfortunately, with some bad news, which we'll get into. And then just some good discussion on some winners and losers in the market and some hidden gems to pay attention to. So why don't we just start right off the bat with Unity, of course, the topic everyone's waiting to hear about.
Yeah, so you're right. The saga is kind of never ending, and I'm not sure we'll have an end to it this month or even the next month. But essentially, the stock is down over 20% since the announcement was first made 2 weeks ago, and it kind of just keeps going down. It seems like the trade-off for monetization just fell completely flat on its face because now almost everything was backpedaled and they lost goodwill from their community. Just some examples that have recently hit the news, and it keeps coming in, but the first official Unity group ever created, Boston Unity Group, kind of an organization of developers around the Boston area that assembled in 2010, dissolved on Tuesday. They're rebranding themselves to like the Boston Development Group or something. So they're basically going to start exploring other engines out of protest for Unity's changes and loss of trust. Again, even though they rolled back most of these changes, it seems like some of the damage is irreparable. And then you had an indie developer, Neognosis, cite shattered trust as the reason why their Switch port of their combat racing game, Ballistic NG, was canceled. The developer basically said, if they can change the terms of service on us at any time, we don't feel comfortable creating a game with this software because it can essentially cripple us financially if, they just wake up on the wrong side of the bed one day. And then another indie game, Vampire Survivors, the dev kind of came out and said, I used this for my game. And that game was pretty big. I think there's even a Wikipedia article about it, but he's like, I'll never use Unity again. And a lot of these issues were addressed by the Create segment president, and Create is their engine business, Mark Whitten, in a fireside chat last Friday. He was saying Unity is trying to build a sustainable business that scales with users' revenue, somewhat similar to what Unreal Engine does with their revenue share model. But, this begs the question, and it's evident through Unity's financials that they're having a profitability problem. But it begs the question, why didn't they just introduce a revenue sharing agreement in the first place? Like now they have a 2.5% revenue cap on revenues above 1 million. But before it was a runtime per install model, which infuriated everyone. And he said that the per install model was lower fee in the aggregate than revenue sharing. I just don't buy that for 1 second. And then the only games that are affected now have made more than 1 million or more in annual revenue and have 1 million or more quote unquote engagements with new users. The problem with this metric is that it's again vague and there was no clarity as to what an engagement is. It's the same problem with installs, essentially. With installs, you can have someone uninstalling and reinstalling the game, installing the game on multiple devices. If the developer is being charged every single time for that, especially in the era of ballooning install sizes, where people are constantly reinstalling games on Steam to manage their hardware space, it just doesn't seem like a well thought out system. And I guess my question for you guys is, do you think it would make a difference if Unity said in the TOS that these types of changes can never be made again, and so you can't be like kind of rug pulled mid development? Like, is there anything they could do at this point at all to build back trust?
I don't think they would put that in their TOS. Any company would probably want to maintain flexibility because you never know how the world is going to change. I think the way they build back trust is just a long road. Not saying it can't be done. I think that like this change in and of itself is a very positive step. And a lot of people who were bothered, they're just gonna be like, okay, this is fine and move on. Like the loud voices that you hear is still probably like a loud vocal minority of the people going crazy compared to a more silent majority that will just kind of roll with it. So I think it's a good step. But the question for me is just more like, it was just very poorly executed and, thought out in some ways. And so to me, it's more like an organizational and leadership question of like, well, are they going to continue? Are they going to execute better in the future? Are they going to make better decisions next time? And that kind of starts at the top, as we kind of talked about in the last roundtable. So I don't know. But yeah, it definitely hurt trust with developers. But, as you mentioned, Mario, with the stock falling down, even for investors who aren't as steeped in like the inner workings of gaming and how all these individual game developers are thinking, everyone from the outside too is just like, what the heck are you doing? And so it's going to take time for everyone to have that trust built back up. And for developers, it'll just have to show like commitment to being better for them in the ways they want to be served. And for investors, it's just going to have to come from results, but it just takes time.
It sounds like obviously the people who have a game in development, right, that aren't willing to cancel it, which is probably going to be most of them, will just like, well, at least let's wrap up this project in it, right? Because now we're not going to be hit super hard, hopefully. But then it's just the question of like future projects, right? Where you go, okay, like they fix this now, but like you don't have much faith in them to make good decisions in the future, right? Because they clearly aren't capable of making really great ones. At least recently. And so you got to imagine like people that are, I don't know. Like, I guess the point about the TOS thing was just like, if they could change it at any point to include retroactive stuff, to include anything from now on, to include people who are already mid-development. Like if you're a hobbyist or whatever, and you could drop the engine at any time, no big deal. Whatever, you just drop the engine if you don't like it. But that's the problem was you're doing this to people that can't do that mid thing, right? Where it's like, it needs to be at least version locked. And I'm glad they went with that, because that was like at least the reasonable compromise to say, hey, we're going to version lock this, where it's like, you don't agree to the new TOS unless you update, which seems like the most reasonable compromise to say like, hey, like if we're not doing any more work for you essentially by shipping new updates, then you don't have to agree to new terms of service. Like that seems like a fair compromise. I would just hope that they would at least do something that would enable some level of trust in terms of future TOS changes. Maybe not a lock-in, but saying like, hey, if we change them, they'll only be on versions, meaning like maybe a minor version, maybe a major version, but something to say that version lock to some extent still applies. If they want to carve out an exception for it, that's like a specific exception. I think that would be at least the transparent way to do it, right? They already had the issue where, like, I don't know if we covered this before, where they like somehow got rid of the repo for the TOS changes because it was getting too low of views just before all this happened. And so they have all this kind of sketchy coincidental behavior that really undermines a lot of the trust. And it's like, oh, if they fixed it now, but it's like, it feels like one of those kind of things like the government will do where they like go to pass a bad law and then backpedal and then pass pretty much the same thing, slightly compromised under a different name. And you worry about that with Unity now. It's like they haven't shown a pattern of great decisions, especially the reputation of the current CEO is not good in general. So, I mean, at least there's going to be some people, right, who gave Godot a peek and like maybe they'll finish their current project, Unity, but they'll be like, let me consider Godot or something else for the next project. Or at least, maybe Unreal. It's definitely only going to help the other companies. But it does beg the question why they didn't just basically copy what Unreal was doing and adjust the numbers to what they thought was reasonable. Maybe, I mean, ideally better than Unreal's numbers so they could be competitive. But obviously they got to make money. But that's like a fair way to do it where everyone understands, okay, I use Unreal or I use Unity and here's the numbers. Like no confusion, no magic, mystical install metrics that somehow can't actually reasonably be tracked. I don't know. They just seem like the reasonable compromise. And the fact that they're making some reasonable decisions is good, but the fact that they don't seem capable of doing that consistently, like personally, when I go to develop stuff, I'm definitely going to be looking at Godot or probably Unreal because really Unreal is just amazing at this point, like the quality and what you get for that. But yeah, like I definitely lost a lot of trust personally in Unity in terms of like just their capacity to make the right decisions doesn't bode well, even at a technical level, because they can make poor decisions around the technical stuff too that just creeps in. And they have had history of occasionally doing that, even under the better leadership. So I don't know. I guess that's my 2 cents on it, but I think we're going to kind of have to see like over a long period of time. It's like Aaron said, like, it might be, a period of time before we even see any effect from this because it's going to be the silent people that do or don't. Not necessarily like the vocal people. So probably won't feel this except for maybe in their stock in the short term. So they probably won't even be that butthurt. They'll move on from this like a week and just be like, all right, that's good enough. Let's move on to regular business now. But we'll see. We do have some bad news though around, I guess bad news around Sony and a retirement. Jim Ryan.
Yeah. So Jim Ryan, who's headed Sony Interactive Entertainment for years, been at the company since 1994, which is just crazy, 3 decades, is calling it quits. He's retiring. The reason given for his retirement was he's from the UK. He wants to spend more time with his family and his house and in his house there. I guess the man is just homesick. But the timing is questionable given some of the tumult resulting from Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard. Sony has clearly lost their case. They, along with the FTC, failed to persuade the courts that the acquisition would be anti-competitive. In the meantime, Hiroki Totoki, has 1 million titles, he's the president, CFO, COO, and representative executive officer, which is a position unique to Japanese companies of Sony Group. And now he'll also be the CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment until a successor is found. I think the timeline they gave was about a year to find someone. It's curious whether they'll hire internally or externally as well. And I guess just something else to note is the last fiscal quarter we had from Sony, the 90 days ending June 30th, PlayStation sales were below expectations. The company said they had to start discounting and offering promotions, particularly in the West, for PlayStation. So, on the one hand, pretty much everything points to this being a planned retirement. But on the other hand, the timing is just a bit suspect. There's certainly people, working into their 60s in these companies. And yeah, that's basically just it.
Nice. I think my view is maybe a little less critical. For one, like what an epic run by this dude. Jim Ryan, 30 years at Sony, and made it all the way up to the very top and put Sony in like the dominant position in the industry. Like Microsoft won that FTC suit in part because Sony is the big dog now. And in part that's because of Jim Ryan's leadership and ensuring, especially this recent console generation, just knocked it out of the park. So, I mean, major props to him. Also, I think that when you're a CEO of like a massive entity like this, there never is a good time to step aside, right? There's always something going on, something in your strategy that needs fixing, something in the market that's a new threat, what have you. And so I think now when Sony is on top is probably as good of a time as any after all the lawsuits, the regulatory stuff is done. And honestly, when you have to deal with that kind of stuff anyways, your job probably is not as fun anymore, I would guess. But yeah, I'm curious to see who will take over. Hiroki has his hands more than full. They're overflowing with what's on his plate. So yeah, I'm curious who will step up to lead Sony next. But my guess is the company's course is pretty set, and so whoever steps in, I doubt is really going to shake things up in a big way. It's going to be more continuation. And even though I think in the West, Sony has done some like bundling stuff, which is I think kind of what you mean with the discount, but I think that's more like all that bundling is zero marginal cost and just ensures that they're taking as much market share as they can, and the demand is still the long-term demand is still pretty good. So yeah, I'm curious what's next, but I don't think this is anything I'm too concerned about. Maybe there's more to the story, but what an epic run.
Yeah, I mean, the man is definitely a legend. I just thought it was, I guess from Sony's perspective as a business from the top down, it felt like they put a lot of emphasis on the court case. Now, like, I definitely didn't think it was like as life or death as they were making it seem. But, just from the business itself, at least from the testimony, maybe it's natural for testimony to be like that emotional or like sweeping just so they can get their point across. But it just seemed like they made it seem like if Microsoft went through with the acquisition, like it would be the end of their business, which again is an over dramatization given they've won the console wars like handily, like 2.5x outsold Xbox over the last 15, 20 years, to the point where Phil Spencer even said, we lost the console wars. And yeah, Jim Ryan, when he joined Sony, it was when the PlayStation project was still under wraps. PS1 came out December 1994. He joined earlier in 94. So he was literally there from the very beginning. And yeah, you can't discount his run. It's just incredible what the guy has done.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's a conspiracy theorist in me, but I feel like whenever I hear health or family as the reason, especially in politics, it usually screams dishonorable discharge, essentially. But I think it's probably most likely he was planning to retire, and maybe they did it a little earlier. Like, because the thing that makes me think that is that they didn't already have kind of a successor teed up. And when you've already been at the company that long, I feel like if you're going to plan your retirement, you give yourself a decent like wind down runway. But I mean, it could be wrong. Like everyone does business differently. Like could be nothing there at all. I just feel like there's like that's what it seems like to me. It's like, hey, I'm going to retire. And they were like, you know what? Now's a good time for you to step out, Jim. And he's just like, all right, well, I guess I'll peace out then, go spend time with my family. Like he was probably fine with it, but it was probably slightly, timed differently, as you said, kind of coincidentally with some other things going on. But who knows? As long as the company ends up in good hands, though, that's really what matters, right? It's like as long as whoever takes over does a good job. I mean, it sounds like we've got like an interim one at least who's experienced, but it does kind of strike me as curious that like someone who's been there that long hadn't at least groomed someone to potentially be a candidate. Like it makes me think of like Steve Jobs, like grooming Tim Cook for so long, right, to make sure that the company was in good hands. So it is maybe just disappointing that he didn't already have someone kind of like that he was mentoring to take over the role, because he's got like such a breadth of experience that he's bringing to the job that his mentoring would have, I think, made a huge difference in the successor coming in and actually really understanding like the storied history of PlayStation's involvement there and what's worked and what hasn't. Hopefully there's enough people around whoever comes in to kind of fill that gap. But I guess we'll see, right? Like it's one of those things where Sony's been doing well enough that as long as they can kind of keep it going and don't lose to like other weird plays like Game Pass and stuff, then I think they'll be fine. We also have some other leaders doing all kinds of stuff here at these companies. Capcom President, I'm not even trying to pronounce his name. I'm terrible at pronouncing Japanese names. He says game prices are too low, something I'm sure we've heard plenty of times before, but it was kind of funny coming out of them as they, doing quite well as a company in terms of games, and also oddly enough, released their game at a discount technically compared to most of the games now that are at the $70 mark. It came out at $60. Mortal Kombat 1 came out at $70, and I don't know, just kind of interesting. What do you guys think in terms of what this means, or whether you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's a super interesting discussion. Before the podcast, I actually went ahead and looked at nominal and inflation adjusted video game prices, like since video games were a thing in 1985. Now, in 1985, a video game cost $40, and in 1990, 50, 1996, 60. And then you had a long period where video games went back to the $50 price point. And like, that's kind of when I grew up, remembering that price point. And then $60 from 2005, like all the way up until recently, where it's $70. When you look at an inflation adjusted perspective, video game prices have actually plummeted. They peaked at 130 during the SNES era. And, now are what they are. So I agree with him in principle. Like, I do think video game prices are too low, but only if you look a la carte. Like, you have to consider the fact that all these video games now have monetization within them. They all have like digital deluxe editions that boosts the base price even further. Just look at Starfield, for example. Like, they're $70 for the base game, but there's all these tiers above that you can also purchase. So I guess, like, in principle, if there weren't all of these additions layered on top of the base game, he would be right. But, ARPU is just way higher than what the base game's price would imply.
Yeah, I'll just say game prices have risen over time. I mean, what Mario said, inflation adjusted, that's true, but nominally they have, and they will continue to. Also, this is one of those things where I'm like, okay, if you think it, then do it, right? Like, Capcom hasn't raised their prices from 60 to 70 for recent games. I'm like, well, if you think they should be, then just do it and be like everyone else. I don't know what you're complaining about. I mean, there is like the, of course, like the big picture thought of like, oh, or should games be more like $100 or something? And I'm sure in time they will be, but I think obviously there are consumer expectations, and everyone kind of has to move in sync to some degree. And so if you want to unlock more revenue, it's not just like the base price, right? It's like, how else are you going to build around it? Or make the game special? Or sure, if you want to try testing higher base prices, maybe you can. It'll just, people won't like you for it. But if they can already raise their prices $10, would be in a totally fine position. So stop talking about it and just do it, is my view.
Yeah, and I mean, video game prices also kind of follow a step function. Like, they're not going to go to $63, right? Like, the jump between 50 and 60 was 20%, and then the jump between 60 and 70 is 17%. And those are like really high jumps, actually. But I think the reassuring thing for the industry is, Starfield sold like 10 million units in like just a few weeks at the $70 price point. It's clear that demand, is on the more inelastic side. So, good for publishers and developers, I guess.
When I did some research on the numbers too, this is the part that kind of concerned me about the conversation overall when it comes to like players kind of rejecting price raises. Is if you look at, so yeah, $60, just for inflation, that's like 120 right now, right? If you're looking at 1995 numbers to now, it's a pretty big jump. But obviously, like, we're creeping up towards that slowly. The big problem for me isn't necessarily the retail price so much as the production cost combined with that. So the production cost, when I was looking at like a PlayStation 1 game around 95, was about $1 million or so, which is $2 million adjusted for inflation. Production budgets now, like $60 million, I feel like is like cheap for a AAA game now. And you're like getting up to 200 plus million for a lot of these bigger games, like Cyberpunk, adjusted for just the 3-year difference, was like over 300 million to make it. And so like these games, like production budget wise, and that's not counting marketing or anything else, right? That's just production budget. It's just so over. And we've had that conversation before, but I think it's relative to the price we're charging for games. Is you start to look at, okay, it costs us so much to make this, and it's not like you're not necessarily multiplying the number of people buying the game by the same number. Now, there's definitely a bigger audience now, right? Like, obviously, there are more copies shipping and stuff like that. And so, like, that helps, like, accommodate to some extent. But it just seems like that's a big problem for AAA in general to try and keep up that pace, because production budgets seem to go up much faster than the amount of, like, sales are making on most of them. Obviously, there's exceptions, right? There's games that just come out and do gangbusters. But I feel like those are, like, the number of games doing that is smaller. I mean, I don't have numbers to necessarily back that up, but that's just seems like to be the case to some extent. And I feel like there's also the secondary problem of like, if they can't raise the retail prices, they're going to go for more free to play type tactics and pressure. So like the example I like to use is Mortal Kombat 1, right? The one I just used of like, it was at $70. But the thing that's like not being considered there is, and it is in the reviews, if you read some of the reviews, especially like Steam, stuff like that, besides complaining about the bad PC ports that we get now for all these console games to save money, but also like the amount of stuff they started sticking into it compared to Mortal Kombat 11, all these gotchas now, like they really changed the monetization around to be a bit more aggressive and a bit more like trying to get people to spend more money. Like, I mean, obviously that's the goal of a business, right? Get people to spend more money, but it's starting to bleed into the stuff that people who are buying premium games up front hate, because they start quoting, hey, I spent, $60, $70 for this and I'm having to spend all this on top. I see that frequently in the Diablo 4 discussions. Like that's becoming, I wouldn't say like a boiling point yet where people are going to like throw their hands up and quit playing. Was causing a lot of dissatisfaction that's like really reflecting on the game developers in terms of just like people just not being happy with the way publishers are like acting towards the consumers. And it's kind of one of those things where you can't really have your cake and eat it too for the consumers, right? Like if you're not going to raise the amount you're going to spend, what do you expect them to do? They either got to stop making the games or like find some other way to make money or just scale games way the hell back and sell them in pieces. I don't know. It's just, and you talk like Cyberpunk, right? Where they spent like that much money. They still spent years fixing it since. Like, so just take that 300 plus million essentially they spent and add much more to it, like just to like make up for the lost time, just to help sell the Phantom Liberty DLC, which I'm sure cost a fair bit as well. And they're probably technically undercharging for that too. So this just seems like, we're not to a head yet, but like AAA games are going to struggle with this for a while. I think it's just, I mean, we're just going to see less AAA games. And the other part of it too, that kind of came out here in another, like, another one of the court case email leaks from Phil Spencer that's kind of tied to this is him basically saying that like, and this, I believe this was an email and not like, a memo or anything necessarily, but he pretty much was saying that straight up AAA games are kind of in a bad spot because they used to have distribution advantage where they could be kind of like bully out the shelf space at retail, right? If retail was the key and they could dominate that, they could make sure that they were getting those eyeballs, getting those sales, obviously a smaller demographic back then, right? But they could command like a bigger portion of it. And then once things moved to digital, especially with Steam pushing that and then everyone else kind of joining in, it became kind of a situation where they don't really have that sort of dominance anymore outside of mindshare. And it seems like Phil was hinting at this a lot, talking about IP, that's why we're seeing sequelitis in franchises now, because if you can't dominate like physical distribution, the only way you can guarantee people are interested in buying your game is it being a brand they recognize, or if you're lucky, like a game designer like Hideo Kojima or like, Miyamoto or, someone that they could recognize, like some brand association with it. They could go, I'm already interested in this game because it's X. And without that, like they just kind of bleed in. We've seen a lot of failures of new IP attempts. Anthem's a good example, right? But that had its own problems. But it's just Redfall even like had its own problems. But it was just, I don't know. People are willing to give a little bit more benefit of the doubt sometimes when it's a known IP, and I feel like this has been a big problem. And the other thing he mentioned, just say real quick before going over to you guys, is around subscription gaming models kind of being the fallback now and helping a bit because it kind of guarantees potentially some profit there without having to necessarily make all the upfront sales. And we are seeing a lot of publishers tried to go to that model. EA had their EA Play, which has kind of been back and forth. They've had to make some deals with that. Ubisoft's been pushing their Ubisoft Plus. You mentioned that earlier about Ubisoft trying to like really thinking that the future is kind of in streaming. And so I don't know if that's really like a good long-term solution, but it does seem like they're kind of trying to find their footing alongside all those funding issues. So, I mean, what do you guys think?
Man, there's lots to unpack in that. I'm not even really sure where to start. I mean, I guess maybe one place to start is just by acknowledging that like AAA gaming as like a bucket or a basket, like not everything is equal. Like within that, like there are going to be so many games that just absolutely crush it and that people are gonna love and they'll flock to. And then there are others that are going to underperform. And I think like having a mix is natural. Like in any entertainment category, you're going to have like hits and misses. And of course, like the threshold is getting pushed higher buy those that can unlock more upside than ever before, and they're pushing the barriers that everyone else has to keep up with. And so for them competing, they're kind of creating their own advantages and being able to do that. That puts others who cannot compete as much more at a disadvantage. And so that's just kind of the way markets work. But that said, I think there is a bear case in that just like, yeah, maybe there should be fewer AAA shots. However you categorize AAA, if fewer of them are going to hit, especially like new IPs, new attempts than in the past. And that kind of sucks. But on the other hand, maybe like the bull case in this is like, well, also maybe the creation of games doesn't have to stay static. And one of the like exciting upcoming trends, with the kind of the rise of AI oriented tooling and such, is that actually maybe like games can in some ways be made more efficiently at a lower cost. And so you can do more with a similar budget. And I think that there is some merit to that, although we'll have to see how exactly it shakes out in different places. But part of this too, like I think it's the market, and Phil Spencer, he's coming from his own point of view, right? Where he's like, well, you're at a disadvantage. And, one way that you can get a potential advantage is to work with us. And that's not exactly what he's saying, like in these quotes, but, there still is like some truth to that he's getting at. And I just don't think that's going to work super well for AAA, because AAA is all about like unlocking as much upside as you can to get that profit margin as wide as you can on the games that do hit, so you can fund everything else. And the problem with subscription is that it caps your upside for these big publishers, and so that's not actually a great fit for that. So I don't know. I think if there is any like narrative around here, it's probably overset a bit. The market will adapt. There's going to be awesome winners. Of course, some people are going to flop. People are going to continue taking shots. The market will change. Business models will change, and that's all normal. But games are going to continue getting better, and people are going to continue to spend a lot of money on the best games. So that's my view on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, we've just seen the removal of like intermediaries from a lot of different, markets. Like, in terms of banking, blockchain has to some extent displaced some of the financial intermediaries. The rise of e-commerce platforms like, Amazon and Walmart's e-commerce has kind of displaced the need for suppliers to have a lot of bargaining power. And then in terms of publishers, like, I agree that it's happening gradually, but that's only because of these acquisitions. Like, I don't think it would have happened organically, that publishers' importance would have been diminished so much. But insofar as Xbox Games Pass and PS Plus, and even Apple Arcade, continue to grow, it is going to become a lot more about relationships with the developers rather than necessarily publishers. Now, publishers will always be needed, especially for indie games. Like if you're an indie studio with a really small budget, you do need someone to pound the table for you, to give you shelf space, even on these digital distribution platforms like Steam. Like it's really hard to just do it yourself if you're a team of like 8 people and your competencies are in development and design. And yeah, to Aaron's point, I also think it is somewhat idealistic. The reason it came out during this court case, like the only reason it's relevant is because of Phil Spencer's dream to have everyone flock to Xbox Games Pass. Like if it was just a comment about the industry, it would have had no relevance in the FTC's case. But, clearly they saw it as relevant due to perceived monopolistic comments.
The last thing I'll say on this, I guess in the comment, it's sort of putting into question the value of publishers. As Mario was saying, like, well, one of the value of publishers historically was, working with all the outlets to provide shelf space and such. And that isn't as true, as needle moving as it used to be. But like the value of publishers, first and foremost for development teams, is funding. And so maybe what happens here is just that like the negotiation leverage shifts a little bit. But publishers are still super important as like financiers. And of course, you could say that like, well, again, Xbox, looking at themselves to come like, you don't have to always work with publishers. You could just work with us. And even though that's basically just saying we'll publish it instead, which actually like it doesn't make a single difference other than it might, again, in a certain model cap your upside in some kind of way. I don't actually think this is like these comments really change much of anything at all. Teams still need funding. Maybe with how it changes, like how teams have gone about funding, it changes, especially with venture funding, what it is now, and that like bypassing publishers in some ways, or even others like Epic coming in with their own like publishing models that they're testing that are much more developer friendly. So you could see tables turn a little bit, but yeah, a lot of this commentary, I don't think it's like defining the future in some radically different way at all.
I guess the thing that I'm thinking might happen is we've had a history over time. It's not like a new thing of AAA's like acquiring smaller developers and then adding them as studios or whatever. And maybe that shifts a little bit, but it seems like that could be the way that they just look at new IP as like, hey, we're going to publish our known franchises because we own them, we shepherd them, we have the money to keep them up to player expectations potentially. But new IPs, we're going to take lower risks with smaller stuff like Fox Searchlight kind of mentality, right? Where they're just going to like, hey, we have our kind of indie sort of label, or we just do it as part of like whatever we're trying to do for smaller stuff because it's going to be lower cost for them in general, less risky. But they could also pick up ones that they're already seeing some success with, right? Where there's already a huge amount of interest. Remember when Kickstarter was like, everyone was like, yeah, no, I don't need publishers anymore. So I've got Kickstarter. And I feel like it turned into, well, I'm going to use Kickstarter to prove out the interest in my game. And then a publisher will come along and be like, oh, I see your game's interesting. So I feel like we get that dynamic shift, right? Where it just, the power for new IPs goes over to those. And also to be clear as well, like Phil Spencer was saying, like this was fine as well. Like this was kind of normal in the industry. He wasn't like being a Chicken Little kind of thing, or it was like, this is just like actually probably a good thing that AAAs need to kind of pare down. The one part I am a little concerned about is like, let's say we take the parallel of movies, which are in a kind of similar situation in a lot of ways, right? Where they're just kind of like movie theaters aren't doing so great. They're kind of really relying on heavy franchising to try and pull everything. But some of the downside of that we're starting to see, especially on the Disney side of things, with burnout on these. So some of these franchises that they're kind of relying on can really burn people out. I remember Activision basically doing that with Rock Band, for example, because they will take certain games and just franchise them to death. Obviously, Call of Duty somehow manages to survive that. But there is definitely like a fatigue that could come from over-relying on these. So I do hope this just means that they diversify better amongst indie studios or AAAs, stuff like that. There's some money out there. And to your point, Aaron, I do think like publishers obviously can help with marketing and all kinds of expertise that indies just don't have. That like absolutely like they don't just have to be purse strings. They could definitely bring a lot of things. Like when people look at like VCs as more than just a money bag, where they bring experience or knowledge or network connections. Like there's a lot that can be brought there. Not always relevant, but definitely like some potential there. But unfortunately, one of a bigger publishers had to make some cutbacks. Epic, the one who also got off some court cases recently, and I think is trying to get back into some potentially.
Yeah, so really unfortunate time, obviously, for the gaming industry from a hiring perspective. And Epic is kind of just, rubbing salt on the wound with their layoffs, terminating 830 people, about 16% of the workforce, and making some divestitures of some acquisitions they made over the last few years. They're divesting Bandcamp, the music storefront that kind of competes with Beatport and other music marketplaces, which honestly just never made a lot of sense for me, like what they're doing with that asset. I guess it was part of their broader vision of having music in the metaverse, but it didn't seem like you had to acquire an entire store to do that. And then Super Awesome, which is a company focused on creating safe online experiences for kids. I actually think they'll be able to fetch quite a bit for that, for reasons, we've spoken about a lot in the digest. These safe experiences for kids are becoming super important, and there's tons of money being poured into ensuring like a non-toxic environment for, children and young and teens. Those cuts are going to result in about 250 departures. The other 600 departures are mostly focused outside of core development, according to Tim Sweeney. But that does mean that there are a lot of people being laid off from core development teams, which include, Fortnite, Epic Games Store, and notably Unreal Engine. And for me, it just seems kind of curious because, Unity has messed up in such a grand way. It now almost seems like the time for Epic to be doubling down and like increasing investment in Unreal Engine, especially the engine, since the engine just came out with its 5.3 release, which is like, lauded everywhere. Why not, continue to spend money, refine the engine, and win market share from Unity? But it does not seem like that is the case. They are interested in shoring up profitability. People have also been saying Epic is going to go public for like three years now. I'm wondering if these cost-cutting efforts are aimed at an IPO as soon as this year. The IPO market so far has been pretty good. You've seen the IPO of ARM, for example, went as well as it could have. But yeah, it's a tough time for the industry. Luckily, those terminated are going to be getting 6 months severance and insurance benefits, which is pretty generous. And I just hope they're all able to find employment as the industry stabilizes.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add other than it sucks, and I feel bad for everyone who got laid off. Obviously, as a private company, we don't really know much of Epic's inner workings from a financial perspective, but I guess maybe it makes sense that they're feeling a lot of the similar pressures as others in the industry from a profitability lens, and are looking to reset, especially as Mario said, if they're looking to go public. The divestment angle of this is interesting, and I wasn't really expecting Epic to have a couple spinoffs this year, but if anything, it kind of shows maybe they're kind of focusing into core areas where they have advantages and kind of view more as their future, and focus is good. So yeah, I don't really have much to add about this. Curious to learn more about Epic over time, especially if they do think about going public and what this business really looks like. But yeah, tough day.
Yeah. I mean, I hope the case is that they aren't necessarily like laying off people to shore up profitability, but more to shore up focus, where they're like, hey, we've gotten a lot of stuff going, and this Bandcamp thing isn't really doing what we need to do. And we have a lot of stuff we need to focus on to maintain market lead right now, and really like capitalize on Unity's goof, capitalize on UEFN, all the stuff that they are doing well, and just double down on that and focus on that better. So, I mean, I hope that's the case. My big concern is like, if they're going to like do this more, I really hate to see Harmonix in a bad situation, because that was one of the companies, like, I mean, good for them, but I was also really sad to see them get acquired, because first off, it meant shutting down a lot of games, like Drop Mix, which I own, was like a physical one, like that got pulled off the stores and lack of support. And now people like treating it like this thing that's hard to hunt down now. And it's like only because Harmonix is gone, like basically. And if they're starting to get rid of music stuff, like I just hope they're not on the chopping block, or if they are, that like it's in a way that actually benefits them, because you hate to see like companies get acquired and then just kind of disassembled, essentially, like, because there's really talented people there doing really innovative stuff that I would love to just see go to Fortnite. And I also hope this isn't just a case of like Fortnite starting to just do worse, because it's maybe past its heyday, and then people just be like, well, we're making less money now, we can't start throwing just tons and tons of money at these side ideas. But we'll see. I do hope it doesn't go public, though, to be honest, because I like the way, Tim Sweeney and stuff runs the company, and I would hate to see it be a bunch of shareholders that might not run it so well, because he's been kind of one of the heroes, in a way, at least PR-wise, perceptively around just gaming in general. Like, it seemed like he's been doing like a lot of good stuff, and I would hate to see that change. But
yeah, I mean, the public thing, in February 2021, Epic hired an investor relations specialist, and the only reason you do that is to go public. But like 2.5 years later, nothing has happened. I'm wondering if that person is still even working there, honestly. But I echo your sentiment on Harmonix. Like, it's been 8 years since a Rock Band game. Like, I would have loved to see Rock Band 5 like be virtual or something. Like, you put a VR headset on and you jam out in the metaverse. But I guess that's probably not going to happen given this news. Yeah, it's just from a gamer's perspective, it's sad to see like Guitar Hero and Rock Band kind of fall by the wayside as people don't want bulky peripherals anymore. It's become a very lean industry in terms of the hardware side.
Yeah, I mean, they also had other great games that were like before the Rock Band stuff that they did, like Amplitude and Frequency and stuff. Fantastic early innovative music games. Their last game, the DJing game as well, didn't require any peripherals of any kind. It was like, I don't think it did as well as they hoped, and maybe that was part of the reason why they were kind of like accepting of the acquisition. But yeah, I would very, very innovative people sometimes are rare in this industry in terms of like successfully doing it multiple times. So either way, hope they end up doing something good. And maybe the case with the investor relations thing, they looked at the numbers and everything and just like, nah, not worth it right now. And so maybe they just backed off on it for now. We'll see. But I mean, on kind of the same note as Harmonix and stuff like that, we just wanted to take some time to kind of do some high level stuff here and dig into some hidden gems and starting with also some winners and losers. Just people that are doing it or not doing it so well in the market.
Yeah, so we'll see where this segment goes. Really, it's just a light news week, and so we were looking for things to talk about. But one of the things that I thought would be interesting just to kind of take a pause on and reflect back is just looking at some of like the top winners and losers of the year from a market standpoint. So Mario maintains for Navic a really great Airtable database of all of the games industry companies worldwide that have a larger than $500 million market cap. So all of the larger games public companies. And, many of them are the companies we all know. Some of them are, others we don't really talk about as much. But the Airtable, which shows up every week in Navic Digest in our top movers segment, which everyone should check out if they're interested in seeing it. It tracks the performance, long-term and short-term performance and everything in between. And so I thought it'd be interesting today to just kind of look at like, well, what are like the top 3 to 5 like winners and losers for the year? And is there anything like surprising in there? And so maybe we can just start on like the winner front and get your guys' thoughts on any of this. And so the top winners year to date are International Game Systems, Rovio, and AppLovin. So, who would have thought that list would be the list of 2023's biggest games industry winners? Rovio is simple. They got acquired, right? So like big premium boost out of nowhere. But for AppLovin, and which was the biggest winner, it's more than doubled year to date. And then International Game Systems being like the other two winners, like probably a lot of people didn't even recognize what that is. So just very quickly on a couple of these, then I want to get your thoughts. So first of all, AppLovin, this is one of those companies, I think the market just hasn't even like known how to make sense of it because it's been hit by ATT. It's Unity and Iron Source merged. Where does that leave AppLovin? AppLovin kind of had a weird strategy of both ad tech and its like apps games business that it's been making divestments from, and that's been shrinking. And people have just been wondering, like, what really is the future of like the ad tech side of the business? Like, where are they taking it? What are they building? I guess the good news is that like, even though the app business this year has like kind of continued to whittle away, and again, they've been like divesting pieces of it, and it's profitable. But the ad tech business, it's been like a U curve. And so it looked pretty bad for a while, which probably explained why the stock got crushed. But, it started to like show signs of growth again. And so people are like, oh, maybe this isn't as bad as what we think. It's not like the business is 150% better. It's just, wow, this isn't absolutely god awful, terrible. As much as people thought. So maybe not even like the biggest winner from like a business standpoint as much as a winner from a, wow, this isn't as bad as we once thought standpoint. So that's AppLovin. And then quickly on International Game Systems, I had to even look up what the heck this company was. What they did is like, I feel like I recognize the name, but it's a Taiwan-based company. Mainly they make online games and arcade games for the Asian region. And at first I was like, I don't even fully understand why this company is doing so well, because COVID, a lot of their arcade games that they sold to China in particular, like that got hit, but I guess they're moving past that. But then I zoomed out and I'm like, this company has like 10x'd in the past 5 years and no one even knows what it is. On one hand, it's understandable because I was looking on the investor relations page and half of everything you download is in Chinese, I guess. So I'm like, well, that's challenging. But anyways, that was the other big winner. And I wish I had more insights into them other than them just being put on my radar, maybe embarrassingly for the first time after they've done so well. But those are 2023's biggest winners. Any thoughts or reflections on that?
Yeah, so I had to unashamedly Google what they do as well, despite maintaining this table. I got them confused for International Game Technology, which is a slot machine manufacturer, like a really big one, actually, a huge company. No, but what these guys do is that they create arcade cabinets almost exclusively off of licensed IP or partnerships with these developers. And one of their cabinets, for example, is like Asphalt, which I didn't even know is an arcade cabinet, but that's like the popular iOS and Google Play game that I'm sure everyone's played at one point. Apparently on its 9th iteration, which is really cool. But these guys are like extremely profitable. For a company that produces arcade hardware, like their margins, like their EBIT margins are like over 50%, which is just incredible. And they're doing like 400 million in revenue a year, 200 million in EBIT. And despite 10xing, their earnings multiple is still only like 16x. So yeah, they're just crushing it. And I think what they've benefited from is the rise of some of these arcade centers. Bandai Namco, for example, is doubling down on their arcade segment. You have the rise of like Round One, for example, in the West. So yeah, they're just doing really well and riding this tailwind. I don't have much to add on AppLovin. I think the industry is just rebounding from last year, which was, just a confluence of things, super weak macro environment, post IDFA environment where mobile advertising was just getting crushed, and then questionable decisions to acquire, Unity in a stock swap deal that would see John Riccitiello as the CEO. So they were saying we want to merge, but after the merger, your guy's CEO is going to be in charge. So it was just kind of weird, but I think a lot of that risk has now been priced out. And they're just rebounding from what was a terrible 2022. The stock was down like 80% or something. And then on Rovio, in January, they were in talks to merge with Playtika. Those talks fell apart. The stock never cratered really because people realized that something was afoot. This company's going to get acquired. And then, a month or so later, Sega comes out, makes a $770 million offer, which is like 60% premium to when before the deal talks were even announced. And then a further 20% premium to like after the Playtika talks were ongoing. So, that's the reason why they've done well. And I suspect next year when we have this discussion, a lot of the top winners as well will be ones that have gotten acquired, just given the consolidation going on in the industry.
Yeah, we'll see. But anyways, I'm even curious to check this out in 3 months and see what changes, because I don't even know if I have like the highest confidence that like this top 3 will stay the top 3. I bet 1 or 2 change places. But let's quickly move to the loser side. And so the 3 biggest losers on our list are Kakao, Embracer, and NCSoft. And we've kind of beaten the Embracer horse to death over the past many months. So maybe we don't need to spend as much time on that one. That's just the growth by acquisition strategy that fell apart and poor capital allocation. Kakao also like isn't really a games company. Like they have a big gaming component of their business, which is why we include them. But like for those who don't know, Kakao is basically like the dominant messaging app in South Korea. And like 90% of the country uses it, and they've just kind of taken that foothold to expand into other areas. Gaming, comics, music, ride sharing, you name it. And that strategy, was really exciting and was, at peak interest, really at peak COVID, right? Where everyone's like online more, leveraging all of these services more, and they just haven't been able to really find their footing since a lot of that pullback began. And of course, mobile gaming being a challenging environment too from the game side. But yeah, now that company is just kind of doing weird stuff. Their revenue is eking up, but like every quarter, lately their profits are going down. They just bought like a K-pop group that's trying to fuel international expansion. They're also investing heavily in AI. So I don't even know. Like, this isn't even really like a true gaming story, but it's one of the games industry's biggest winners if you want to view it from that lens. But the other company is NCSoft, which is also a South Korean company. Sad year for these South Korean companies on our big losers list. But this is like much more of a clear gaming story. And NCSoft has had an amazing 25-year run. It's just that lately they've had a bit of a blip. And this is a company that focuses, of course, on mainly MMORPGs like the Lineage and Guild Wars franchises. And it doesn't take rocket science to figure out why this company is down a lot. You look at the last quarter, their sales are down about 30%. Operating profits are down a lot too. This is because the game Lineage W, which this time last year was like their largest mobile game, and it represented a majority of mobile sales. And this is, like very much like a mobile. This company has mobile games and console or I guess more PC games really with MMORPGs, but mobile is a big part of the business, and the biggest game of that, has seen its sales fall over half from last year, which has just dragged the entire company down, and that's just a tough place to be in. I'm not an expert on Lineage W to tell you exactly why or how to turn that thing around, but that's why it's fallen so much. And NCSoft just management hasn't been able to figure it out yet. They've had to do layoffs, and so a much clear, sad, near-term gaming story. But again, the long-term trajectory of this business has been awesome. And I wouldn't necessarily project what's going out right now, into like a long-term view, but a bit of a reset for NCSoft. But anyways, those are the three losers. Any reflections on that, Mario or Devin?
Yeah, I mean, we've beaten Embracer to death. Like, my one sentence comment there is their acquisition strategy during a zero interest rate environment has backfired. And I'll just leave it at that. And then in terms of Kakao, they're more than games. Obviously, they have this internet business, but from the gaming perspective, they publish Black Desert Online, which is like this huge MMO, mainly catering to Korean audiences. And they handed back the publishing rights to the developer Pearl Abyss in 2021, so they lost that revenue stream. They publish PUBG in South Korea, and PUBG has obviously declined in popularity, which is evidenced in Krafton's performance as well, which has not been great. It's kind of all these South Korean companies have been riding the tailwind of Krafton, which is like, the biggest video game company in the country. And then in terms of NCSoft, Guild Wars 2 has now been out for 11 years. I think they recently changed the strategy for expansion packs. They used to release them like every few years at like, a higher price point. It's just struggled as the game has aged and MMOs have kind of waned in popularity. And now they're switching to a more like frequent release strategy with lower cost DLCs. So they're just struggling there. And then regarding Lineage, I know that franchise was supposed to debut in the West, but since Lineage W was launched, they just haven't had the traction to be able to release it outside of Asia. So yeah, just not a fun time for them.
There's a couple of things I picked up while I was in South Korea that I think are kind of relevant. NCSoft and the whole thing with Lineage, one of the things I found when talking to a lot of the game developers and stuff like that there is South Korea can be like very trend driven, where they'll like play something for a while as like a whole in the country and then like move on to another game. Like everyone kind of does. It's like this kind of move from game. And like I was even asking them, like, how are you guys surviving as a game company when like you just have to move from game to game and just like hope that your game's one of the next ones? And like you're talking about two old franchises, then Lineage and Guild Wars. And if Guild Wars isn't relevant in the West anymore like it used to be, like that's a big part of the audience loss, right? And then if Lineage can make the journey to the West as well, then it's really dependent on South Korea. And with the fad-driven kind of nature, like it sounds like it hit really well at first, right? But then died off really quick too. And it sounds like it just trouble sustaining, especially with so many MMORPGs in South Korea. Like that's a very competitive market. like in general. Like, and if something else just comes along, takes everyone's attention, especially an MMO, like requires a lot of player base. Like if they just move over, like the game's just dead. And so it's interesting. And it's also interesting that they kind of let Pearl Abyss, like I remember seeing Black Desert doing pretty well, and I think they just are releasing another. I don't know if it's an expansion or another game kind of in the series, either like relatively soon. I think I saw. So they seem to be doing okay as a company. It's kind of a bummer that they don't have that revenue stream anymore. And the other thing I picked up related to Cacao that I thought was kind of funny is you can't do Google Maps down there really for the most part, like for walking directions or driving directions or anything. Like you have to do Cacao for it, and they are oddly not super English friendly. It's so you have to kind of use it, and it was very difficult to use. But as I'm using the app, like they just have so many, like in the Maps app alone, like just so many other social feeds and all these other things. Like they really are trying to be that kind of like everything sort of thing down there, and you can kind of see it like, and maybe like that's kind of waning a little bit where people are not as interested in kind of having the everything app. I don't know, tell Elon I guess as well, but I don't know, I thought it was kind of interesting seeing like what they were trying to do there, and it kind of maybe just not being as interesting to the audiences out there anymore. And this could be all temporary stuff, but just a couple of things I thought were interesting from the time in Korea blockchain week.
Yeah. Anyways, I just find this general topic interesting. And one hill I will die on is that the best game there is the stock market. And so following this stuff is super, super fascinating to me. And of course, however you slice and dice this data too, you get different answers, whether you're looking back over the past year, the past 3 years or something. So it could be fun to revisit this segment from different lenses from time to time. But anyways, we're kind of at the end. One thing I kind of want to quickly hit on, we mentioned we'll talk about hidden gems, and we can do this quickly, but maybe each of us can throw out one hidden gem. It could be a company, it could be a game, could be a trend. I'll go last. Mario, I'll throw this to you first.
All right. So my gem is a company, and that company is Devolver Digital. These guys have just been absolutely crushed since IPOing on London Stock Exchange's secondary market a couple years ago. At the time, it was like the biggest IPO for that market. It was like, $950 million. Now their market cap is closer to like 150 million. So like just down significantly. And I think the reason is that they followed a very similar strategy to Embracer, albeit on a much smaller scale during COVID. Well, they published Fall Guys, obviously, and made a lot of money from that. And then those rights were sold when Epic acquired the developer Mediatonic. And then they just needed to reorient the business. So they made a ton of acquisitions. They acquired Good Shepherd Entertainment, Nereal, Firefly Studios, Dodge Roll, who they published their game Enter the Gungeon, which was another success for them. It's just they've had trouble finding their footing. There's been tons of game delays. They've even went as far as creating like a game delay showcase, like being proud of the game delays, many of them of which are going out into 2024. But their pipeline is actually looking pretty good. And I think the company has just been like crushed to the point where people think they're going to go bankrupt, but like they have no debt on their balance sheet. They are releasing a ton of games next year. I'm just, I guess, more optimistic on them than a lot of investors, I guess.
Let's be honest, the real problem is lack of Hotline Miami 3. That's the big weakness right there. No huge hit like that to really push things forward. But I love them as a company. Like they're just the most self-effacing humor, like the delay thing as an example. If you ever want to see like just the weirdest, craziest press releases, they're like sort of E3 kind of events that they do. Like obviously there was no E3 this year, so they did their other thing that was just, they're wacky, man. They're just crazy. And you can find them on YouTube. I don't know, they're a good time. I enjoy them as a company though. They're kind of like this punk indie kind of feel. And I don't feel like we have enough of that in this industry. It feels like it's pretty much just them. They're like the closest thing to like maybe like a AA, really good solid indie publisher with like really good marketing and relations. So I hope they do really well. My hidden gems, everyone's going to hate me for it because everyone hates cloud gaming. But GeForce Now, it kind of like Stadia, where like kind of not so great at first, right? Like it was, had a lot of problems, it was kind of weak, selection wasn't great. But I tried it again lately, and I have to say it's come a long way to the point where it's definitely competitive with xCloud in terms of performance, and possibly even getting up there in terms of Stadia's level of performance, which was like by far the best in class. I tried really games that latency really matters. I was playing like Battlefield 2042, just kind of running around trying to play crazy. Rainbow Six Siege is still the hard one to really kind of like do because it's so twitch driven and tactical that like peeker's advantage and stuff matters. So I don't know if it's like, I feel like that's kind of the litmus test and like probably performed maybe just slightly below Stadia. But the thing is like their selection's really good now to the point where like I was actually thinking about canceling my Game Pass because like selection wise, the thing that I think is really cool about this is like, obviously it's like, you have to buy the games, right? Like that was part of what people were confused about with Stadia, but this is your Steam library. And I think much in the same way, the Steam Deck was a huge like success in a lot of ways because it leveraged your existing library. I think this does the same kind of thing. Like it's surprisingly good at that because I went through, I have a huge Steam library and it obviously doesn't have all of them, but it had a pretty good portion of games, both new and old, just good selection around. It also had like free-to-play games, just as their own section that you could play, like, which is, I wish I would have noticed at first because I was going to try Destiny 2, and I'm like, oh, I guess I could have picked it from that instead of just picking it from my Steam library. But it's really nice in a lot of ways if you don't have a high-end gaming PC. And there's a lot of people out there that, would be interested in PC games that just don't have a high-end gaming PC. And obviously, that's where cloud gaming steps in. But I just thought it was really nice. And it's just, it works with a lot of stuff. And like you think about Steam library is like you can get a lot of games on sale, a lot of cheap, and now they work across multiple platforms. You can play this thing on like a Chromebook. I don't know. I just thought it was really nice to see. And I think if it's been a while since you've checked it out, I was playing on the free tier and it was performing as well. Like I recommend people like give it another peek because I was very impressed with it. And I will definitely be playing with it more because I'm the one remaining champion of cloud gaming, I guess.
Interesting. Those are both good answers that I wasn't expecting. I'll close out. Mine is a company too, and it is Enad Global 7 or EG7 for short. And I have to give credit to a Navic reader and listener, I believe, in the hedge fund space for pointing this out to me. I'd heard of the company, but I had never really given it a moment of thought. And it's a very small company. It trades in Sweden and I think if you convert it, it's only like a $200 million company, something like that. So it's very much a small cap. But we all know about, the boom and bust of the growth by acquisition games companies. We've talked about Embracer dismantling. Stillfront has, been going through a reset too. And EG7 was another one of those companies that was making acquisitions. And similarly, when the market changed, it got crushed too. And now it's, a very small business. But there are a few things that make this company different from the rest of the pack. One is that its portfolio is largely online and MMO leaning, which are, sticky and cash flow machines. They're just like better businesses than, bloated studios or, just really like a portfolio of like old mobile games. And so, this is games like DC Universe Online, EverQuest, Dungeons and Dragons Online, Magic the Gathering Online. I think they own like H1Z1. It's just like a bunch of just like those kinds of games. So it's a really like unique portfolio. And I think they do some co-development work too. Second, old management left and new management is in. And so the people that pursued the growth by acquisition strategy are no longer running the company. And instead, this guy, new CEO, G Ham, I think is how you pronounce his name. He's ex-private equity, ex-investment banking, and he was the CEO of Daybreak, which was EG7's largest acquisition. And now he's running the full show. And from what I've seen, he just shows like really strong, intuitive capital allocation sense. He's like redirected the company's strategy. He's made divestments to make them more focused on what they do best. And I haven't really seen like great like capital allocator type CEOs in the games industry. And it kind of makes sense in a creative industry, but maybe he's about, on that path to being like a good capital allocator. We'll see. And lastly, like most growth by acquisition companies, the financials went through a reset, but the team has a very clear growth plan for establishing its next era. as a business. So they're actually targeting pretty swift growth over the next 3 years, like mid-teens revenue growth, and then like double that, if not more, for like profitability and EBITDA growth. But this is a company that's really freaking cheap because it's tucked away in Sweden and no one pays attention to it. And so, for example, fiscal 2026, they're projecting about 1 billion SEK, which is the Swedish currency, in EBITDA. Their current market cap is 1.8 billion. And so if they get anywhere close to that, like this is a company that is probably going to multiply. And I need to spend more time in it to see what I think about all the games and just all the details of the business. But if they do anything close to what they say they're going to do, holy crap, this is a hidden gem from an investment standpoint. So shout out to Navik hedge fund friend. Don't know if you want to be named, so I won't name you. But yeah. Anyways, I always enjoy stumbling across these kinds of companies. But I'll close with that.
Yeah, and I mean, Embracer's kind of in the same boat. Like their enterprise value is like 45 billion krona right now, I think. Like it's literally like lower every single day, so I can't keep up. But they're projecting to do like 10 this year, so like 4.5x earnings if they can get anywhere close to it. And like they've already had a quarter's earnings released and reiterated that they're on track to meet that. So it's, you know, with these businesses that are this cheap, like I feel like it's a very bifurcated outcome tree. It's like either they fail and like go under, or they go up substantially because a company can't be valued at that valuation for a prolonged period of time, like without some catalyst or getting acquired. So yeah, I mean, I'm like, as much as Embracer has screwed up, I'm also optimistic on them as well.
Well, I'm not yet on Embracer. I think these companies are pretty night and day. I think maybe if we check back with Embracer like a year or two from now after they've reset, and if they have new leadership that has a completely different mentality, I'd kind of view them more similarly. But yeah, what's interesting to me about EG7 is they used to be something like an Embracer, but they're really just like something completely different now, which is new and exciting. But I don't know. We'll see. I'm excited to learn more.
I think we definitely going to have to revisit the hidden gems like more frequently, just because it's like there's a lot of these silent companies, like in terms of like our perception. You just like, wow, I didn't even think about that company, like IGS you mentioned earlier, like just, you know, or you know, when we brought up keywords that one time, just a lot of these companies are just off the radar of people's, you know, knowledge base. I think would be really worth pulling out. Definitely good stuff. Also, something I forgot to mention, just as one final note on the GeForce Now thing that I forgot to mention that I thought was really cool is support Steam Workshop, because it's essentially using your Steam account. So, because I tested it out with Tabletop Simulator and it just started downloading huge mounds of mods that I had essentially in there. So only cloud service for games that supports mods. Thought that was kind of neat. But anyways, moving on from there, of course, thank you for the panelists. Great conversation, lots of cool topics, some better news than others, but that's how it always goes. Also, thank you to the listeners. I want to make sure everyone, again, remembers to send us feedback, podcast@navik.co. And also a shout out to friend of Navik, Eric Kress, for some feedback I got from him recently. And me misspeaking in a previous episode where I was talking about the Rainbow Six servers going from Azure to PlayFab. What I actually meant was PlayFab was what they were on, and they were going over to GameLift. Although it sounds like from what I did some reading afterwards that maybe it was only certain regions that switched. In other words, it was kind of a mixed bag. But anyways, thanks to Eric Kress for catching that, my misspeaking there. So I appreciate that. But again, thank you everyone for tuning in. And of course, have a great weekend, and we'll catch you guys next week.
If you enjoyed today's episode, whether on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, or give a 5-star review. And if you want to reach out or provide feedback, shoot us a note at podcast@navik.co or find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Plus, if you want to learn more about what Navik has to offer, make sure to check out our website, www.navik.co. There, you can sign up for the #1 games industry newsletter, Navik Digest, or contact us to learn about our wide-ranging consulting and advisory services. Again, that is www.navik.co. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.